Okay, so let's get started with our first topic here. So just let me give some introduction to the contents, what exactly we do here. So initially we start with IP addressing, that is what we'll do in this class here. And once we have some basic understanding on IP addressing and the versions, we get into some advanced IP addressing, we call it as subnetting. And then we'll have some basic understanding on OSI reference model and TCP/IP models, how exactly these models describe the network communication. So then we can get into some introduction to the routers, where we'll see what is a router, what are the different components of the router, different ports of the router, and how the connectivity is established, different models of the routers. And then we see some different modes of the routers with including some basic commands. So mostly here in this part we'll start our labs, where we'll get into the command line of the router, some basic commands like assigning the passwords and doing some basic verifications. So once we have some very good understanding on basic commands, we probably move to the WAN connectivity, WAN technologies, which are used for providing a WAN connection between two or more different locations. Like if you remember, just we discussed in the previous video over there, we discussed that if you have a branch office here in one location, let's say in site 1, you have another branch office in the site 2. So we need to have a routers connected on both the sides, and we need to provide a connectivity from router to switch, and then we need to provide a connection from router to router. So mostly we deal with what are the different types of WAN technologies, and this is something given by the service provider. So we'll see those WAN technologies after that. So once we understand the different types of WAN connections and the different types of technologies which can be used for providing the WAN connections, next thing we get into some basic IP address configurations, and then frame relay, introduction to routings. So the main part starts here, where we see routing, and then we'll see static routing, dynamic routing, default routing. Again, in the dynamic there is RIP, HRB, OSF protocols. We'll see more in detail on that, and then access list, network address translation, and then we get into some more switching concepts here. These are all relating to switching concepts, and then some introduction to IP version 6, and finally we'll see password reverting on routers, and then backup and restore on the routers. So it's a big list of topics. So but anyway, you get some more better idea once we get into these different types of technologies initially. So don't worry, so probably we'll get into more in detail about all these technologies. So now the first topic, we are supposed to start with something called IP address. So let's get started with IP address here. So you know that IP address, generally we say protocols. You know, there is something called protocols. So we know the basic definition of protocol. Protocol is a set of rules which a user has to follow. So protocol is a set of rules which a user has to follow in order to have a proper communication. So just like if you want to communicate with each other, we need to follow some standard language. Like we use a common language, English, which is a standard language for communication. Similar way, when you talk about network and networking, there are different types of protocols used in our networks. Like initially, if you go to earlier days of networking, like in 1970s, 80s, there are different protocols used. We got TCP/IP protocols, which was developed by Department of Defense, and then there is a protocol called NetBIOS, NetView, which was a protocol designed by Microsoft for communication with Microsoft operating system devices. And we have a NetBIOS just now we wrote. So we have some IPX, SPX protocols developed by Novel Machines, Novel Network Operating Systems. And then we have some AppleTalk protocols, which was developed by Apple Machines, for which is used in Apple different Apple machines. So just to say, there are a few protocols. Apart from this, there's a big list of protocols. But even though we have different types of protocols, like these protocols are like different languages, like so this protocol is a separate language, this is separate language, this is separate language, this is separate language. So everyone was using their own protocols for communication. If Microsoft want to communicate, Microsoft use their own language, NetBIOS protocol, and Novel uses its own language, and your Apple machines uses its own language. So everyone had their own set of protocols. But later on, they made this TCP/IP has been made as a standard language. Standard means, like English, we have a standard language which is most commonly used. So similar way, they made TCP/IP as a standard language because of one reason. Because we can say internet. Because the internet, which is the biggest network in the world, where everyone is connected, the requirements of it, the advantages of internet. So in case if I'm using a Windows XP operating system, and Windows XP operating system is your Windows operating system, is developed by Microsoft. So it's a Microsoft operating system. So Microsoft by default supports NetBIOS. But if I want this Microsoft operating system should be able to connect to internet and it can exchange information, then my device has to mandatory support a TCP/IP protocols, because TCP/IP, the internet works on TCP/IP. So which means later on they made mandatory that even if you're using Apple machines, so when you install the operating system, by default it comes with TCP/IP protocols. So that is something which has been made mandatory by everyone. That makes my TCP/IP protocol as a standardized protocol. So we don't use any of these protocols much, and we don't really need to understand how these protocols behave, what are the different inbuilt protocols into that. So just we need to learn the TCP/IP addressing. So we need to understand different protocols of TCP/IP. If you talk about HTTP, generally we access web pages. HTTP is a protocol. When you're sending and receiving the files, FTP is a protocol which is used for sending and receiving the files. When you're sending and receiving the mails, we have SMTP protocol, simple mail transfer protocol, POP3 protocol, IMAP protocol. There are different protocols which are. So these are all inbuilt protocols inside TCP/IP. Like we have a DNS service. If we talk about DNS, DHCP, like DNS service is just like whenever we send a request, let's say if I'm like DNS is actually an inbuilt protocol inside TCP/IP, which is going to convert your name to IP address. So we'll get into more in detail about these protocols. But now the first topic which we are going to see, so the protocol which we are going to use in our network for communication is TCP/IP, Transmission Control Protocol, Internet Protocol. So now whatever the addressing. So before we get into this,